Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Literary Cafe. My name is Helen Liu, and I'm the Programming and Partnerships Manager at Cary Library. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank the Cary Library Foundation. Their support enables us to bring programs like tonight's event to you. The Literary Cafe was created by the foundation, and they're pleased to collaborate with Kimberly, Hensle, Lawrence, and Marjan Kamali on this series. I'd also like to thank the public libraries in Ashland, Bedford, Maynard, Marlborough, and Needham for partnering with us on this program. This program is being recorded and will be posted to the library's YouTube channel. If you have any questions for our authors, please enter them into the Q&A. Now I'd like to introduce our host. Kimberly Hensle Lawrence is Vice President of the Cary Library Foundation Board. Please join me in welcoming Kimberly, who's going to introduce our very special guests this evening.
Thank you, Helen. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cary Memorial Library and tonight's Literary Cafe, Romance Authors Talk Happily Ever After. As Helen mentioned, the Literary Cafe is a series of talks we've been hosting here at the library for about 3 years now, and we've had a fantastic assortment of authors speaking with us about everything from Shakespeare to climate fiction. And of course, tonight we're talking romance. We encourage you after tonight's event to hop over to YouTube and look up Cary Library, and you can see the playlist for all of our past literary cafes, and you can check them out. We are so excited that you've made time in your busy schedules to be with us tonight. We have wonderfully talented authors with us, and we're very grateful for all of them for also being here. So I have many, many questions. Probably way too many questions for tonight. And we imagine that you, our audience, have questions too. We'd love to hear them. Drop them in the Q&A, and we'll reserve some time for the end of our conversation to get to them. So tonight's authors, I've had the joy of reading their books, all of their books, and they write fun, swoony, smart, thoughtful novels that will move you, teach you something you perhaps don't know, make you laugh, and most importantly, they've written stories that will stay with you long after you finish the last chapter. So let me hop in and introduce them. We're going to go alphabetically because that just seems the easiest. So our first author is Kate Cochrane. Kate is a former Division I hockey player, ice hockey player, and that is relevant for her debut novel, which is an ice hockey themed novel. She's a lawyer and now serves as a university law librarian. In 2017, she was a fellow in the Lambda Literary Writers Retreat for Emerging LGBTQ Voices in the YA cohort. Again, this is her debut novel, came out last fall, and she has another book coming out this year. Actually, all of our authors have new books coming out in 2025, which is super exciting, and we're going to talk about all of those tonight. And I should add, since this event is sponsored by Cary Library in Lexington, Massachusetts, that Lexington is proud to call Kate one of our own. We had to do the Lexington thing, yeah. Okay, so Thien-Kim Lam is the author of 3 novels. The first is Happy Endings, which was a Washington Post Romance Novel of the Year. Her second novel is oh, I did it wrong, didn't I? Okay. Happy Endings, Full Exposure is her second novel, which is a Mardi Gras themed romance set in Louisiana. Her third book, Something Cheeky, best titles ever. Something Cheeky. It comes out next month. And Kirkus, which is a book review website, says that her romance is refreshingly sex positive and inclusive, and it's focused on characters who don't always get the spotlight in the genre. I got an early read of it, and it's so good. In addition to being a writer, Thien-Kim coaches writers of color and is a certified sex educator. Nikki Payne is the author of Pride and Protest and Sex, Lies, and Sensibility, modern and steamy retellings of Jane Austen. They are so much fun. And she also have a new book coming out this year as well called The Princess and the PI. Kirkus describes Nikki's writing as lively, sexy, and fresh. In addition to her fantastic career as a writer, she also has a daytime career as a curious tech anthropologist who asks all the right questions to deliver better digital services. And she's also a member of Smut U, a premium feminist writing collective. So impressive, wonderful authors. Okay, so why are we talking about romance? One of the reasons we're talking about it is because Romance is one of the hottest genres in publishing. In fact, it was the highest earning genre of fiction in the industry in 2024. Amazing. Amazing. And I was really curious, like, what makes a romance novel a romance novel? And I have some definitions here, but I wonder what the three of you say. What makes a romance novel a romance novel? Nikki, do you want to start with for us?
Oh, I think it's a given, right? It has to it's happily ever after, right? The genre demands you give these lovely people that you've tortured for 200 to 300 pages a soft place to land, right? No one reads a mystery and goes like, "Oh, I hope they find the criminal." They're gonna find the guy. The romance, you're like, she's gonna get the guy. They're gonna get together. The mystery is how. So I would say that's what makes a romance.
Kate, Thien-Kim, anything you want to add to that? What else? What anything
Yeah,
else?
I want to add that, it's a satisfying love story between two or more characters
Yeah.
of any different gender or sexual orientation. It doesn't have to be, tradition in the past it's only been a man and a woman in a heterosexual relationship, but there's so many more types of relationships out there than just two people, right? Two cis heterosexual people. So yeah.
True.
Kate, anything you want to add?
Uh, I, I think it makes it a romance. Yeah, it has to have a happily ever after, happy for now, which I like because you don't. I think there was a time where it felt like happily ever after you had to have a wedding at the end, and I think there's a little more space for these are two people who have overcome a lot of obstacles
Yeah.
and have a long future together, and it allows a little more openness to what that future looks like. But yeah, you're gonna go through it and then you're gonna be happy in the end. So I think it's very comforting as a genre. I think that's a piece of it. Even if in the middle of it, it's a real struggle.
Even if in the middle you're a little stressed out, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
all of your books, I was like, there's a moment where I had to remind myself, like, oh, this is a romance novel. It's going to work out. Because you all really do put them through stuff. Nice conflict. Conflict makes the story hum, I guess. Did you all deliberately set out to write romance? Was that where you wanted to land as an author, or was it a journey? How did you come to write romance? Thien-Kim, you want to start? Tell us how you came to this.
Sure. I've been reading romance since I was in middle school. Reading Harlequin category romances that I was probably not supposed to read at that age. And I just remember as I got older, I stopped reading romance because I didn't feel like the books had people that I could relate to. Basically, they were all, white people. And so I feel like I'm a late bloomer when it comes to writing romance. Like I started in my um probably like late 20s, and I decided like I'm gonna write the books that I want to read. And it took some time to like get that first book finished, but that's really why I started writing romance. I wanted to see people, Vietnamese American people, Asian people. My husband is Black. I wanted to write about Asian and Black pairings because it's not something you see a lot in romance. So thankfully, you see a lot more now. But when I started writing, there was hardly any that I could find.
Excellent. Kate, how about you?
I didn't start I started writing when our second kid was a baby to have something that I did every day that was just mine because it's a lot of just the same day over and over again. Um and from the beginning I think they all had romantic elements. There was usually a central romance to the books that I was writing. But this is, I think, the first one that I would be a category romance that I completed. It was definitely not my first try at writing a book by any stretch. But I really like that sense of writing stories that I didn't have growing up. There weren't a lot of gay romances growing up. Certainly not what I think of as jock romances between two women, athletes. It was always like, is this girl gonna stop being such a serious jock so the boy will like her? That was sort of the, the thing, and I was like, I don't want to read that. So, uh, yeah, a lot of people say, write the book you want to read, and I did that with this book.
Excellent. Nikki, what about you?
I started writing really weird sci-fi, like Jane
Mm,
Austen in space, or um like Afrofuturist sci-fi, and I was just writing all of this and sending it out to agents like, my work is so beautiful, I'll wait, and of course I was getting back, just no's from every universe, like, no, we had you tomato, tomato. So I was just like dodging tomatoes. And there's like this moment where you're just getting a lot of no's. And then I just started to like work on something for myself that brought me joy.
yeah.
Jane Austen has always been my origin origin lady, and she was really funny to me. And I just started writing these stories to cheer myself up from this universe of no's. And I was getting so many no's that I finished a book, and 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 ended up sending that out just because it was already done. And then that everyone was like, "Oh, we love this," and that started the romance career. But it honestly started from me just wanting to feel um, joy
Yeah.
and feel something like a little effervescent in the face of all of these no's.
I love the theme that you all are sharing, which is like writing something that for yourself, writing
Mhm,
something that you wanted.
mhm,
And then what you found is that what you wanted, many other readers wanted as well.
mhm.
And that's really that's exciting. That must be very rewarding to know that this vision you had for yourself could connect with other people. How did you all decide to write contemporary romance? Because when I thought about romance, I mean, I think a lot of people did. You think about like everyone's in the Scottish Highlands and they have long hair and kilts, or pirates, or I don't know, Regency England. Like it was a very particular type for a long time about romance. I mean, even the New York Times did an article last week about like romance novel recommendations, and almost all of them were those kind of traditional or stereotypical bodice rippers. But you all have really changed, I think, the way a romance novel can be seen. Your your books have a gorgeous love story in the middle, but you explore issues that are very current day. I mean, in your books, I read about racism, microaggressions, cultural appropriation, gentrification, poverty, sexism, homophobia, grief. These like very human, well, unfortunately, some of them are human, but very real things people today are facing. You counterbalance it with family and friends and friendship and career and love, but you really address these very serious topics. I'd love to hear from you about exploring your stories in contemporary storyland. Like, why did you come to that? And then, how did you approach writing a love story grounded in issues of such importance? And how did that influence the story at the heart, the love story at the heart of your novel?
That's a good question. I'll start because one of the things that I love about Jane Austen writing in Georgian and Regency um, England was that she was very much writing about contemporary issues. She was very much tongue in cheek, talking, using the marriage plot, right, to talk about the status of women, right? If you read Pride and Prejudice and you read that and you don't think that Jane Austen has a POV about who gets to inherit a, an estate, right, then you're not reading it right. Or that she had a POV of particular type of clergyman, right? So you could see, even in reading her, that there is an understanding of what's happening in society and an ability to both translate that into an enjoyable story where the right person gets the right guy, but Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy were in their time periods and bodies in their time period, and it had to deal with what it meant to be in those bodies
Mm,
in that time period. And I think that's not it's not endemic to like contemporary literature to do that. I think any character has to go through life as the person in their body, right? And and I'm saying that to say that I think one of the things that I love about doing that retelling was translating that same extremely sharp eye that Jane Austen had for social commentary, for looking around at what's happening and going, ain't this some bullshit? Like, she was just the queen of that. And I think that's any retelling of Jane Austen is actually a little tongue in cheek with social commentary. Otherwise, what are we doing, right?
Excellent. Thank you. Thien-Kim, Kate, anything you want to add about your stories?
Yeah, so I did not choose to write anything historical because I was terrified of doing research and getting things wrong. Which is funny because I've had historical romance authors tell me the same thing about contemporary romance. But for me, like my books touch on all those issues because my characters are people of color, and they just by existing, we are being political, right? They cannot exist outside of all those things: racism, gentrification, capitalism, things like that. So, how is it that they can live with these big issues, but also find joy and happiness? And that's what I really aim to do in my novels. Like, yeah, there's these big forces that make life challenging for them to achieve their dreams, but how can they overcome it for this moment, right? Because it's a marathon, right? It's not a race. Like even um with anything that big, it's going to take time for change, but they can make their changes in their own little way. And I want to show that in the story, and then have fun, right, with their love story, because it's a rom-com, so I want people to laugh and enjoy and escape, but also challenge them to think about these different issues.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thank you for that. I was struck when reading all of your novels about they're how you're all affecting change by telling the stories in the way that you're telling them. Right? You're all sort of moving the needle so people will think differently about what it's like to be a queer couple in America, what it's like to be a mixed race couple, what it's like to be a Black couple in America, or all these different factors. And I found that to be like really moving about all of your stories. I was really impressed by that, the way you can weave in social issues of today in a love story. And maybe you have a reader who hadn't thought about it that way, who would see it differently. I found that really inspiring in your work.
Really
Kate?
cool.
Sorry, you just froze for a second, and I
Oh,
was like,
sorry.
"Oh no, what happened?" But maybe it was me. Maybe I froze. And now I've forgotten what I was going to say. I didn't set it in the past or the very distant past at all because I was afraid of the research, and also, um, it's a really, I think, unique moment right now for women's hockey in particular. We have a brand new second year professional league that didn't exist when I was a kid. I wanted to play for the Bruins. Clearly that didn't happen, and they're the poorer for it. But I I thought I really wanted to talk about what it's like to be an athlete who, when you're done, you're not a millionaire, right? Abby Wambach has talked about this, that like LeBron James, whenever he's done playing, whenever Michael Jordan was done playing, they have enough money that they never have to work again if they don't want to. But like she she doesn't have that luxury. And so I have a couple of characters who are like, what do I do next? I've been the best. I have gold medals. And there's nothing else in this sport for me that's sort of like I'm going to be in a bunch of commercials, or it's not, you don't have that. I can just go sit and do nothing. So that was a piece that I really wanted to touch on with these two.
Excellent. Thank you all. How do you begin writing a romance novel? Where's your inspiration? Does it start with a character, a setting, a moment? What's that spark? We have a lot of people who watch who are aspiring writers. So I'm curious what you would say, like what was that? Yeah, what was the spark of your writing of the different stories? Thien-Kim?
Oh, this is tough. Each book has been different, but I'm very focused on character. Like I want to come up with their entire like life story. What do they want? And so for me, it's like creating two characters and how would they interact? And I think about what romance tropes that I want to play with, right? So Happy Endings was a second chance romance, and then Full Exposure was kind of like a vacation, like, weird meet cute, which the meet cute was based off something that happened to me and my partner when we were dating.
Ooh,
And so I go from there, and then I kind of like, can I create a story around these characters to make them interesting? Like, why would they fall in love? So that's how it all starts. Just think about the character, because I think like romance is very, especially contemporary romance, is very character driven. And once those are all in place, I think the rest of the story comes together better for me.
great. Kate, Nikki, what's your inspiration? Spark.
For Nat and Darcy, it was a little like we live in a world where there are a lot of women hockey players who play for Team USA and play for Team Canada, and there are like at least 4 or 5 couples who have ended up getting married, one on the US and one on Canada. And I hadn't seen that in a book, and I was like, why not? This is perfect. How and then from there it was, how do I get these two people together? How do I and in this case it's a second chance romance. So how did they originally meet? How did things go well, and then how did they fall apart, and now we're in the present, and what are they going to do about this now that they're stuck working together? So that was sort of the inspiration for me. There's a lot of male hockey player romance, whether it's two men or men and women or some variety of the two. But there's not nearly as much sapphic hockey romance, and I don't understand why. And if I need to write it, then fine. But I will happily do that.
Nikki,
I
what about
love that. Thank you for your service, Kate. Okay. Gonna do like the slow salute with the shaking hand. You're doing great. You're doing amazing. Um, I often start with like a bit or some like scene in my head that I think would be a hoot, or something that I just want to see that I have not seen before.
you?
So like I think oftentimes of their meet cutes, or for example, there's a scene in Sex, Lies, and Sensibility where a black woman comes to a um, like goes to a home that is kind of occupied by the indigenous hero for work that he's doing. And she's like, "Oh, this is this is my place. I just inherited it." And he accuses her of being a Christopher Columbus, just kind of Columbusing the house. And she's like, "What? What? I'm sorry, moi?" She literally is apoplectic at the idea, right? But like the way that identities are nuanced in context is like one of those the types of things that I wanted to like highlight, and I just wanted that scene of someone saying, "Me in this context, I am this." No, and it was a funny scene that I just really wanted to write.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Um, so one thing that I really was like my top question for all three of you is, let's talk about spice. Because come on, we read for character and plot, but we also read for spice. We do. And so I'm so curious about writing the sexy scenes. How do you go about doing that? Do you have like on the sexy scene writing day, like you have a certain outfit you wear, like a glass of wine, like, you know, I'm like editing all my questions as I say them out loud. I don't want to be inappropriate, but I'm so curious about the environment you set up to write a sexy scene. How do you know how spicy to make it? What's your thought process on the spice level? Because I've read romance novels where there's no spice, and then I've read them where my face is turning red as I'm reading them. And I'm so and I am a grown woman who is married with children. So I'm just really curious about your process for writing them and how much spice is just the right spice. Who wants to kick us off?
I'll go.
Can I suggest?
Okay.
Oh, I was just
No,
gonna say.
I'll go, because I need to say that I love the idea that I could put on a special outfit and have a glass of wine, especially because when writing this book and others before it, I was literally sitting in a camp chair in the bottom of my closet typing at 5 o'clock in the morning so I would not wake up the rest of my family. So the idea that this is like some sort of glamorous anything is like, no, it's 5 minutes here and there.
So no sexy shirt.
God, I wish there, I mean, no, like pajamas and a hoodie and the bottom of a closet. With clothes around my head, like just nothing glamorous at all. But the rest of, like, I think I'm a wasp, and we're like a little uncomfortable with feelings and talking about feelings and all that stuff. So I would sort of gauge it as like, okay, if I'm feeling a little uncomfortable, we're probably not quite there yet. Like, I need to get a little out of my own comfort zone here and not think about the audience. I can't think about the audience at all. I cannot think that, oh, my parents or my kids or somebody, my third grade teacher, I cannot be thinking about that at all. I've just got to right in the moment. So I'll stop talking now.
Nikki?
I will say like it's sometimes you just have to like fit the parts together, you know? Like sometimes you just have to sit down and do the work. And then there's some moments where you're just actually inspired. Like it's cyclical, maybe by the phases of the moon. If you, you know, like there are just times you're just like, actually, I need to pause right now and write that down, you know? And you have to like give into that feeling when you when you like have a scene or something pops in your head and you just have to like kind of give into it. So I would say it's a combination of just brute force, like sitting down. It is X amount of time, and I have to finish the scene of just like connecting the parts. And then there's also this aspect when you go back because writing is revision. When you go back, you're just like, let me smooth that over. What's that skin feel like? Or yeah, and you just go over it and over it and over it. And to me, it's in the revisions when the 90s R&B comes out. It's in the, you know, it's in the revisions when the you know when the candles and the vibes start going, but in the writing I'm like cranking it out.
Excellent. Thien-Kim?
Uh, I do not wear anything fun when I'm running those scenes. I actually had to stop running my spicy scenes when my kids were home because they would come up behind me and start reading. So I would write them at night. And now they're a little bit older and they leave me alone writing. Uh, but for me, so the very first thing I had ever published was an erotica short for Best Women's Fiction. Um, so I like that's I love writing love scenes. Like I could go on. I actually periodically teach a class on writing love scenes. And I don't know, like for me, like in all of my scenes, not just love scenes, I can see the characters like a movie in my head, and then I'm just trying to translate that down onto the page. So for love scenes, it's the same thing. Like, but for me, like I'm not focusing on the physicality, but like the emotional journey. Like what makes these characters want to kiss at this moment? What makes them want to take their clothes off for each other? Like what is one character's goal? Like it's just to get their love interest, you know, to achieve pleasure, you know. And then things I think about as I go further along into the story as they become more intimate is like, well, they already had sex, you know, on a table. So like the next scene, let's do something different, you know, like try to change things up, change positions, who's on top. Like for me, like who's on top or who's initiating is like you see the power imbalance, not imbalance, but the power shifting between the couples. And those are the things I think about intuitively as I um write the spicy scenes.
Mm. If someone was watching and they were, thank you for all those comments, those are great. If someone's watching now and they're a writer and they're about to write a sex scene, what's the one piece of advice you would give them other than don't write during the day when your kids are home? That's very good. Is there something else they would say? Keep this in mind as you begin. Any sort of wisdom?
I would say like try to build a playlist. I mean to Tien's point, there is more than what you want them to do. There is a way you want the reader to feel.
Mm.
And if that's protected, if that's taken care of, if that's heard, if that's understood, if that's completely ravished, right? Um like connect with the way you want your reader to feel. So I do that sometimes with music, a little Jodeci, you know, um, and um, and then like it helps me reconnect. Like if I'm going back to a scene, it helps me reconnect to say like, okay, do we have enough baby please in this scene? You know?
That's great. I like that. Thank you. Kate, advice. Hoodie. Wear a hoodie, maybe, but no.
Obviously.
Obvious.
I would say number one, try not to think about how this is gonna be like received. Like the editor in your, you gotta try to turn that off until, as Nikki was saying, when you come back to the revision to make sure it's working. Um, but I would say try to remember that this is your character, like be in the character and not it like it can feel personal, but you're like, how would this person be acting in this moment? And what does that tell your reader about who they are? Because you're in the same way that if you know they're how they drive or how they talk to their family or anything like that, you're communicating who they are through this, through the sex scenes, through the, you know, leading up to the sex scenes or whatever it happens to be. You have something to tell the reader that goes beyond just the sex, the mechanics of the sex on the page.
And can I add to that 1 second? I love that you said that because honestly, like real talk, there is a sense of like getting to that character at their core that you can explore sometimes the most in a sex scene. Like fundamentally, is this person generous? Fundamentally, is this person kind, thoughtful? Fundamentally, is this person like all of these things? Like too buttoned up and wants to get wild. Like those fundamental aspects of a character. It's a way for that reader. It is a sex scene, but it's also a way for the reader to say like at this person's core, um, they are this, they are giving, they are actually wild, even though they're a librarian. They are this, even though they're this, you know? And that's that's an awesome thing to discover about your character.
That's so good. Thank you. Dan.
So what I think about when these are all great tips, and I love how we have different approaches to how we write because everybody writes differently. For me, like I think about like the characters at this point of the story, where's their relationship, and then how does this love scene affect them? How is, it doesn't have to be both characters, like one character, like how are they at the beginning of this moment, and how will this experience together change them or how they see the other person. And I think about that. And that's how I create the sex scene, right? Like if someone is finally admitting that they're in love with somebody, they're gonna like take charge of the moment, right? Because this is they're feeling empowered and excited, as opposed to maybe just having the, you know, like letting the other person initiate. So I think about all those things and like the mechanics. Every like I feel like people focus on the mechanics so much, like slot A, you know, like tab A, slot B, or whatever. But honestly, that is like the least important part of the scene because you can always go back and fix those things. You know, like in happy endings, my copy editor said, "Hey, he already took his pants off. He can't take them off again." Dang it!
Can
So
I
you can
just
fix all those things. Yeah.
also say I don't know if you all agree with me, but maybe like there's something waspy in me too because there's nothing more excruciating than getting like technical edits back for your sex scenes. Like when you're the editors in there saying like, "Can is this possible?" Or and you're just like, "Oh, I can't look away. I don't want to."
Okay, I have, you know, those artist models, like the wood models where you can
Yeah,
pose to draw. I have two of those, and I will pose them together
yeah,
to make sure that it's possible,
yes, yes,
physically possible.
I love that.
If you have, I mean, Barbies don't, their joints don't bend, so you could do something like GI Joe. Get your GI Joes and let them kiss. You know.
got it.
I hope
Got it.
readers understand all that you go through to make sure that it's authentic.
We are out here
You're out here doing
We're
doing
doing the
the work.
work.
doing the Lord's work.
I see that there are a bunch of questions from the audience queued up. Those are great. Thank you. Keep them coming. I have some like one question for each of you about your work. Because again, I got to spend all this time with your books. And so, Nikki, I'm going to start with you. In Sex Lives and Sensibility, there's a beautiful author's note.
Mm.
when you talk about honoring the Abenaki, am I pronouncing it?
Benaki. Mhm.
Abenaki people and their culture. The main character,
Mhm.
the main love interest in this book is Abenaki. And you talk about how important it was for you to represent them well
Mhm.
and with care. And I wondered about your inspiration for including that group, that community in your novel. How did that come to you? And what did you, it sounded like from your author's note, you did a lot of research and talked to people in the community. What did you learn from that experience?
Oh, that's a great question. I'll start with the second part first. Is I traveled to Maine, and I think my background as an anthropologist just always biases me toward being there, like talking to someone, like engaging, seeing, being a fly on the wall, seeing how people speak to each other. Um, it is absolutely fine to do, research in any way that you like. But for me, I just feel like, there's just something about just sitting in someone's couch, smelling the pine sol. Do you know what I mean? And so there's an aspect of that I wanted to do in that community. But I think the reason why I wanted um, to work on like a Black and Indigenous couple is that I just feel like a couple of things. These are two of the oldest, subgroups in the United States. Really, as at the founding of the entire nation, right? And um, there's a lot for Black folk and Native folk to talk about amongst themselves, like without white people in the room, right? And so like there are not a lot of I mean, to Tien's point when she was talking about like that dearth of romance with like an that Asian and Black combination. Something that I rarely have seen is like a Native American character and a Black character, and the thing about romance is that whether we mean it to or not, it says a lot about who gets to be a desirable character, who gets to be chosen, and who gets to be at the pinnacle of desire for someone, male or female. And I think when we put new types of characters in those bodies of like peak desirability in those spaces, that some it just does some work, some just small little crack of possibility work. I'm not, Desmond Tutu or anything, but I just personally think it does work for the imagination. But and then the first part of your question was that I did want to move them to Maine, and Maine like is comically devoid of Negroes, and so one of the like that was kind of this bit like this joke, but I also wanted them to engage in the community and just kind of be this fish out of water that finds family, and I wanted to do that in a way that I hadn't seen before, and I knew there was such a really strong and powerful Penobscot reservation and Native community there, like one of the few Native communities that were not kind of driven off their land because of the way that they interacted with Anglos throughout the years, and I just thought that was an interesting story there.
Thank you. Tian Kim, I really loved In Something Cheeky, which comes out next month. I loved how you highlighted your Vietnamese culture. And it's so beautifully woven into the story, and it's the center part of the story. Right? The two main characters are adapting a fairy tale into a musical, a Vietnamese fairy tale, and that gives you an opportunity to talk about Vietnamese fairy tales, clothing, food, traditions. And I wondered what that was like for you as a writer and as a Vietnamese American to celebrate that in a novel. Did you feel like a great sense of responsibility? Was it scary? Was it joyful? What was that experience for you?
I was excited to really highlight Vietnamese culture in that way. The fictional musical the characters are working on is my feminist retelling of our Vietnamese Cinderella story, which is way more interesting than like the Grimm's brothers, because there's like reincarnation and there's deities and there's lots of death. It's a very violent story. But also like it gave this me a platform to talk about the Asian American diaspora, right? This country is huge. The United States is huge. People grow up in, I'm a child of immigrants. and people have grown up in different areas, metropolitan areas, small towns like me. And so I wanted to show like the two main characters had very different experiences growing up. And what does that mean for them feeling Asian enough, doing a play that's that's all Asian? And because it's different, like people have certain stereotypes and expectations what an Asian person is supposed to be like. And when they meet someone who doesn't fit it, it's all of a sudden it's like, I don't believe you, or you're not really Asian because you don't do XYZ. And I really wanted to show that um when it's just like one person in a story, they have to be everything, right? But when you have a bunch of Asian people in this story, like in Something Cheeky, they all get to be themselves. And that's really what I wanted to showcase.
Wonderful. Thank you. Kate, you are the most debut of our authors. That's correctly phrased. But your book came out in November, right? And so this has been, I imagine, a whirlwind to launch your first book. What's been the most surprising part of this journey of bringing your book into the world?
It's a little surprising that it happened, I think. And not, I mean that in the sense that so I said that I started writing when my youngest was a baby, like less than 6 months old. She's 13. So that's how long it took to get to the place where I had a book on the shelves. So it felt a little bit unbelievable, a little bit like a dream come true, a little like, is this actually happening? Like, are the books actually going to show up? Is this, am I going to wake up at some point? But it's been really amazing, and it's been amazing to have the experience of writing a book where I was like, I don't think this is going anywhere. I don't think anyone's going to see this. It's just for me. I was in the midst of a book. A book had died on sub. I had broken with my first agent. Like, I was like, this is whatever. I'll just write this thing and see what happens. So it's been amazing to see every step. Oh, it has a cover. You mean that, or someone wants to buy it? Okay, now it has a cover. These are the people that I envisioned. Like, the whole thing has been both amazing and kind of unbelievable. It's been really, one of the things that's been really great is being able to share it with my wife and our two kids, from whom I stole time all those years to write a little here and a little there, and to be able to say, like, hey guys, it was worth it. Like, there's a real book. I'm gonna still keep stealing time, but there's a reason for it.
Excellent. Oh, wonderful. So I'm gonna ask some audience questions, and that was actually one question is related to what you said. Amy asks us, what are your tricks for carving out time to write during your busy days? Because you all have other things that you do, law librarian, anthropologist, sex educator, like you do other things, teacher, coach, I think the life of a writer is many, many things, many, many pots boiling on the stove at once. And so Amy wants to know, how do you carve out time for yourselves to write during the day, busy days? Nikki, how do you get it done?
That's a good question. I set aside a time, 9 p.m. to like 11, and I just sit down with my laptop, and literally, like, my children are all buzzing around me, and I have taught them, I don't know you. Go to your father. Who are you? At around a certain time. It's taken a little while, and my husband has been great, like doing a little block and tackle, but I have had to kind of carve out a time and build some understanding in my family to say, like, hey, this is something really important, and it doesn't just benefit me. It benefits all of us. We can go to Disney. Remember that time we went to Disney? It was because of these 2 hours you give me. You know what I mean? Just give me these 2 hours. And so, like, that time and creating a boundary and making sure your family is aware of that boundary, even if they always think it's an emergency. The glass of water that they need is dire this time, and you just have to say, like, hey, please go ask your grandmother, ask your father. You know.
Uh, Great, thank you, Kate. We know you're writing in the closet in the morning.
Not anymore, but
Not anymore. Okay.
But yeah, so before we have this puppy, who's now 1. But before that, 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. was my hour of writing, and then maybe a lunch hour at work or something like that. But yeah, now it's a lot of just whenever I can.
Thien-Kim, what about you? How do you
I
carve
would
out time?
say noise canceling headphones are your friend if you can afford good ones, like buy the best ones you can afford. And so that when you tell your family that, yeah, like I need to do this, put on those headphones, whatever, so you're not distracted by, kids and family. Because I know as a parent, it's hard to turn that off. But for me, like I don't write every day. So when I sit down to plan my week, I look at my schedule and I say, so I'm the kind of writer that needs a block of time to like really warm up and get into flow. Like I am so envious of people who can just sit there and like write for 5 or 15 minutes and then do it again like 3 hours later. So I actually like block out like, like 2 days a week. I don't 3 days a week, whatever my schedule allows, and I'll spend a couple of hours each day. I'm probably good for, I know like now that I've finished 3 books, I know that I can only really write for 2 to 3 hours at most. And I honor that and don't try to like be so hard on myself.
Great. We have another question. This is from an anonymous attendee. There are a handful of common tropes in contemporary romance, like enemies to lovers, friends to lovers. Well, there's many, many. Is there a situation that should be a trope that you haven't read? I think maybe this question stumped our audience.
No, it's a good question. I just have
Yeah.
never thought of it.
I've never thought about that either. I mean, like I know there are tropes that I personally don't enjoy reading, but that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um, or hmm, I don't know. You stumped us.
Stumped us.
Yeah.
Kate, looks like you're thinking.
I can't think of one, but my favorite thing is to take classic tropes and mess with them. So, and by mess with them, I usually mean make it gay. But like, I love second chance romance. I love fake dating. My next book has, best friend's big sister instead of there's been a lot of like, oh, best friend's older brother, right? I've seen that a lot in like straight cis very white romance. And so I'm like, well, what if the older sibling is the like hot older sister? So I I'm sure there are tropes that should be tropes that I just can't think of, but in at this point I'm like, let the non-white, non-hetero, non-cis people play around with them and until we're bored.
Nikki, what's your favorite trope? Do you have a favorite
Oh,
romance trope?
favorite trope is I feel like enemies to lovers is God tier trope.
Yeah.
It works on a variety of levels. I'm actually writing a Substack right now about anthropologically why we are tied to enemies to lovers. But I love it. It can go wrong very quickly though, right? Like if you construct a book and everyone's just screaming at each other and they hate each other, and then somehow by in the middle of the book they're making out. Yeah,
Yeah.
of course there's like craft to it, but I love enemies to lovers. Love it, especially with a forced proximity. Like if they are handcuffed to each other and hate each other in a coffin,
Is this what's happening in your next book?
man, you nailed it. You actually nailed it. Yeah.
That's a great segue. So, Nikki, you have another. Again, I mentioned everyone has a book coming out this year. We've talked about Thien-Kim's Something Cheeky, which comes out March 4th, right? And then, Nikki, you have The Princess and PI coming out.
Yes, yes. So, what I love about The Princess and the PI, like who among us has not Googled the results of Love is Blind or The Bachelor to see who really got married? But like imagine when you got a little bit over your skis and you took your Reddit detective um persona a little bit too far and suddenly you are framed for the murder of a tech giant and you need the help of a very jaded PI with insomnia to help you, who has absolutely zero patience for your Reddit detective skills. But too bad because you have to work together, and there are a lot of stakeouts, a lot of steamy late night confessions, and it's also really fun. Just imagine like if Detective Cross had to work with like the unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, you know? So it's fun to write and I can't wait for you all to read it.
Comes out September 16th,
September 16th.
and we've dropped pre-order links for all of your 2025 books, as well as your other previously published books, in the chat. So go check those out.
Right.
Kate, your next book, Yours for the Season, you just did a cover reveal on your Instagram, and the book comes out October 28th, just in time for the holidays.
Yes, it is a set at Christmas time, small town holiday contest set in rural New Hampshire. And the premise is a character from Wake Up, Nat and Darcy, who's in the book for like a second and a half. She is the main character. Her name is JT Cox, and she is coming home for Christmas. And lo and behold, the next door neighbor is the newly divorced older sister of her best friend, who she has had a crush on since she was 12. And they team up in this contest to beat her ex-husband, who's kind of a dope. And fall in love.
Excellent. Again, links are below. What kind of readers were you as kids? Were you constantly had a book in your hand?
Oh, I was precocious. I was reading things, right? Like Stephen King, just like books that my mother should have slapped out of my hand. But I was a really precocious reader, romance as well, Tien, and a lot of detective novels, a lot of horror novels. I read everything I could get my hands on, except for like my actual textbooks, ill. But like, yeah, I read a lot.
What was your favorite book from childhood or middle grade? Do you all have a book that's like
I,
that you think of as like a huge influence on the reader or writer that you are today? Kate's reaching for a book, so it's right there. What about you, Thien-Kim?
like, did we have good middle grade books? I just remember like Hatchet and like
Yeah, like I mean, we passed around VC Andrews in middle school.
BC
Like
Andrews.
we were
Flowers in
supposed
the
to read
Attic.
this.
Is
Oh,
that middle grade? Is that YA?
That's adult.
oh, it's
I read that. I read that when I was like
You see
10.
how broken we are? Just like, is that what?
Um, I mean, like I read, so I lived in a small town and we had the bookmobile stopped in front of my home every week, every Wednesday afternoon, because we were the only kids in the neighborhood that would come. So they just started parking in front of our house. And I pretty much like read everything on that bookmobile. I did all the kids' books, like like the chapter books. And then once I was done, I did like Gothic, like Victoria Holt, Stephen King, and then I went into romance. And after I read a romance, I read like all the mass market paperback section. I mean, I just read everything I could get my hands on because I just loved it so much. And I would hide under the covers, and my mom would tell me to stop reading and watch TV. But like that's how much I
Oh,
read.
I grew up in a house where my parents actually owned a bookstore when I was a kid. And they're just books everywhere. My siblings remember a little more than I do working at the bookstore and getting paid by getting to pick out a book at the end of the day. So I read constantly anything I could find. I was like reading the back of the toothpaste tube if there was nothing else in front of me. One of the books, though, that really stuck with me is called In Lane 3, Alex Archer, and it's written, it's about a swimmer in the 1950s. That's when it's set, and it's sort of it'd probably be considered middle grade now, but it's set in high school. And it was one of the few books about a girl who was really serious about sports that I remember reading. Lots of boy sport books, but not very many where the girl was and very ambitious, wanted to go to the Olympics athlete. And I really just love that book a lot.
Carol wants to know if any of you read Judy Blume.
oh, I did.
I did, but I couldn't relate to them honestly. Like I read them because I thought like they were there and very popular, but I could not relate to the characters.
Who was Ramona Quimby? Was that
Beverly Cleary.
Beverly Cleary.
Yeah.
I read a lot of like as a kid, a lot of like Beezus
Mm-hmm.
and like I read a
Jesus
lot
and Ramona. Yeah.
of Ramona. Yeah.
Harriet the Spy. That
Harriet
was more my vibe than Judy
Yeah.
Blume.
Yeah.
Super Fudge. Like that was more silly, a little bit more silly.
Yeah.
I did fantasy, so like Chronicles of Narnia. I love like the idea of escaping into a new land and being the queen of a country.
I love that.
Excellent. Sarah asks if you've ever considered writing a different genre of romance. So you're right contemporary now. Would you consider writing romantasy, or now that you've had a couple historical, I'm sorry, a couple of contemporaries under your belt, would you try historical, for example? Or are you just really are you happy where you are in contemporary?
Well, Princess and the Pie is a romantic suspense. So I'm
There you
like
go.
definitely in my Nora Roberts. I'm in my Sandra Brown era, you know. So my next couple of books will be a little bit edgy, you know, a little bit of something in there.
Excellent.
I have a couple of fantasy ideas knocking around that I'm working on in addition to some, contemporary. So
Excellent.
I wrote a book that will probably never see the light of day, because it was not that good. But it was basically a queer League of Their Own. So that was historical. It was YA because I was writing YA at the time, but that was really fun. But I don't know whether that will ever come back around.
never say never, Kate.
Yeah.
Yeah, you never know. We are unfortunately coming to the end of our time. You all are like such a delight. Thank you so much for making time for us. Thank you to our audience with these great questions. Before we go, though, I have one last question, which is if you were to go back and talk to yourself at the beginning of your romance writing journey, what one piece of advice would you give yourself, or what would you tell yourself about what was to come?
I think I would tell myself to be very you have to piece out now what matters and doesn't matter. I think as a debut author, you start to think that everything matters, and you know if someone doesn't mention you in this roll up, or if you're not in some list of best of or something, and you really have to tease out what actually matters and what doesn't for your career. Because when you're a debut, when you're starting, you think everything matters. And I just would have saved myself so many gray hairs realizing what was actually not important to focus on.
That's good advice.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on what Nikki said. Like, focus on what you can control. Like, publishing is a really hard business, and there's so many factors that we as authors can't control. So, focus on the things you have control over because you just drive yourself crazy worrying about all the other things.
That's great. Thank you. Kate?
That's it. Just keep going. It's like you're gonna want to give up, but just keep going.
Excellent. Thank you again, the three of you, for being with us. Thank you to our audience. To our audience, we've dropped in all these links so you can go read these books. Please do. They're terrific. Thank you to Helen Liu from the Cary Memorial Library for all of her expertise in running tonight's event, to Marjan Kamali, my partner in planning the Literary Cafe, to all of the librarians and staff at Cary Memorial Library who make events like this possible. Special thanks to Laura Bernheim and Mandy McLean who shared their expertise for planning tonight's event. And I hope that you all have a good book on your bedside table as you head off to sleep tonight and you spend some time reading. I hope these authors make their way to your TBR pile. And to all of you, I can't wait to read more of your writing, and I wish you much success in the future in your endeavors. So thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
for having
everyone.
us.
Thank you.
Good
Happy
night.
Valentine's Day.
Valentine's Day.